Hello friends, followers and channel members, welcome back to the channel, and in today's video we are going to be having a look at delivering a departure briefing for your flights. Now, this is something that you will usually see me do on the live streams, but I thought it would be quite interesting to see what actually do we put into a departure briefing, and is it actually possible to put too much into a departure briefing. Things have changed in recent years where Airbus and lots of airlines now are trying to thin out the amount of detail that goes into a departure briefing, because you could literally talk about every single thing that you are going to do, and lots of those points don't actually need to be highlighted because they're the kinds of things that would be done anyway on every flight. One of the main features of a good departure briefing is the threat and error management. So basically anything that could be deemed as different from the norm. You don't need to talk about things like the flight route and all of the waypoints you're going to hit on your departure, because that's given to you, it's already been done. The same with things that you already know from your charts, such as what heading you're going to fly after departure or what altitude you're going to be climbing to, unless it is significantly different from the normal operating procedure. Incidentally, you know what heading you are going to be flying because it's part of your flight plan. You'll know what altitude you're going to be flying up to because ATC have given it to you and you've got the clearance on your chart. You may, however, want to highlight something that might be different in terms of a heading that could be given under certain circumstances, and just sort of pre-brief something that you might think could occur. And this is basically just getting the pilots ahead of the aircraft, good situational awareness, and preempting things with the question, what if? Now, there are a number of things to think about with regards to what could possibly be a threat. Starting with the airport itself, it could be an airport that is unfamiliar to you. It could have a really long, convoluted taxi routing. There could be lots of hotspots on that taxi routing. Air traffic control itself can also pose some threats if there are restrictions in place, or if you're flying somewhere in a part of the world where the language isn't that great and understanding, in which case mitigate this by potentially not being scared to ask air traffic control, what did you say? Can you repeat that? Definitely better to know exactly what it is they want you to do than to just assume because you were too afraid to ask. The aircraft itself, of course, can also be a threat if there are any minimum equipment list problems, MEL issues, so things that might not be working on the aircraft. It could be something as simple as being really heavy and departing somewhere with quite a steep climb gradient for your departure. The more obvious ones are things like the weather and the environment. You could have things like low visibility procedures. In the real world, some airport lighting might not be working on the approach system. The weather, of course, is probably the most obvious one. If you've got wind shear reported, if it's really harsh precipitation, you've got heavy rain, contamination on the runway and the taxiways, all of these are obviously threats that you will want to bring into the briefing and then discuss how you're going to mitigate them. Another one, of course, then is terrain. Obviously, if you're departing somewhere with high terrain and if it's an unfamiliar environment, then you're going to have to do whatever we can to try and improve our own situational awareness so we're not caught out should things start to go wrong. There are, of course, in the real world other things that happen which don't particularly happen in the simulator. Things like airline operations. For example, we could be late and then you're under sort of schedule pressure to try and get that aircraft turned around and back on time. There could be load issues with the ground. There could be delays for operational airport reasons. The crew itself could also be a threat. If the crew has been working for a long time, they could be fatigued. You could have a first officer who might be quite new or has never been to the airport before. But then the opposite is true as well. You can have really experienced guys in the front of the flight deck flying the aircraft and at the back, in which case there's a chance of complacency coming into place, particularly if you're flying into or out of an airport that you know very well. Now, in the flight simulator, things are going to be a little bit different compared to how they are in real life. In real life, there is a great emphasis on the two pilots discussing this together, rather than having one pilot saying everything and the other pilot agreeing or asking questions later. The idea is to have a good conversation and back and forth chat between the two, and building up a singular mental picture so that both pilots know exactly what the plan is, what the threats are, and how you're both going to work together to mitigate them and ensure a safe departure. Right, so let's have a look at some departure examples. If at any point anything is confusing or you have a question to ask, then please do leave a comment down below and I will do my best to come back and answer these for you. Okay, so in the flight deck then, we have got the aircraft all set up. We're pretty much ready to go. Clearance and things have been obtained from air traffic control, and we're just waiting to contact them and tell them that we're ready to push and start. We've already been through the operational flight plan by this point, so that part of the procedure is all done. We're literally just ready to ask the person sat next to us if they're ready for a brief. Now, Manchester is pretty straightforward, and I know many of you who follow this channel will be familiar with Manchester Airport as well. That isn't a bad thing, even for real-world pilots that are based at a particular airport. Say the crews that may be based here at Manchester, they're not going to overdo the briefing just because they know it so well. In fact, it can be a very short briefing because it's the same thing that they do day after day. There's no need in overcomplicating things and just adding more words to the briefing, because a long briefing isn't always a good briefing. So with the flight today, let's go through and say that we do know Manchester Airport very well, so it's not going to be really over the top. First thing we need to just check is that our takeoff weight is going to be below our max landing weight, so that just mitigates the fact that if we need to do that emergency landing for whatever reason after takeoff, then we can get back in and we don't even need to think about that. We've already been through the NOTAMs for today and there isn't any, so that's quite nice. We've got nice weather today, it's not raining, so there's no contamination on the runways or taxiways, etc. That's all fine. Alright, so let's build up the plan so that the pilot, myself, and whoever would be sat next to you in the real world have the same mental model of what's going to happen for the departure. So we're at stand 15 today. We'll expect to push back then, facing south on Juliet Echo, and we're departing today on runway 23 left. I would imagine then the taxi route for that is pretty straightforward. It will be Juliet Echo Foxtrot, then crossing runway 23 right into this little hotspot that we've got there, Foxtrot Zulu. Just need to be aware of that because we could also have other traffic coming across from hotel. And then it's just straight down onto Victor, and we'll either be told then to continue on Victor or maybe take a Tango, and we've planned our departure figures today from Victor Charlie, so anything prior to Victor Charlie that ATC give us is going to be fine. Only if they tell us to depart via Victor Delta will we need to rerun the performance figures, but the chances of that happening are rather slim. So we've got all bases covered with that. Little threat then with the taxi. We're obviously crossing an active runway, so let's make sure those strobes go on when we do it, and we're looking before we cross. Basic stuff, but worth just mentioning. As it's quite busy at Manchester today, there could be a little bit of delay when we are actually here. So is it worth doing a single engine taxi? Well, yeah, I think we could probably get away with doing that today. But if we are going to do a single engine taxi, let's identify the point where we're going to get the second engine started. For me, that would be then as soon as we've crossed runway 23 right. Once we've got that crossed, then we'll start that second engine, and that will give us enough time to make sure it's been running for 3 minutes before our departure. The departure itself then is the Samba 1 Yankee departure. It's a noise abatement 2 departure, so the most normal one for us. And yeah, it's just the standard departure that you'd be used to. It's straight out with a slight right turn, passing 3.2 miles from the Mike Charlie Tango VOR. That's already coded in to the navigation database, so we can get the autopilot on and I'll fly that for us all by itself. Our initial climb is 5,000 feet, MSA is 2,400, and there's no turns below 760. There's also no speed restrictions or anything like that, so we'll just clean up and accelerate as we go on schedule. So what about any sort of threat mitigation or error management then for this departure? Well, as I said, Manchester is pretty straightforward, probably one of the easiest places to get out of. There's a little threat there just down at the bottom on this chart saying just a warning for runway 23 left departures, which is what we're doing today. In the event of a missed approach on 23 right, air traffic control may give us an instruction to basically make a left turn just to keep clear of an aircraft potentially going round on 23 right. So that's worth just bringing into the brief, just so we know that that is a potential. But at this point then, are there, you would ask the person sat next to you if you've got any questions or any other threats that they might have identified. In the real world, of course, they might have, but from what I can see here, particularly on a day like today where it's sunny, there's no reports of wind shear or anything like that. It's a pretty straightforward brief, a straightforward day out. So then let's have a look at the engine out procedure. Now, the engine out procedure doesn't need to be sort of briefed in full every single time. Things like mentioning that you will rotate and aim for 12.5 degrees pitch following SRS commands, wait till you get to 400 feet, confirm the engine failure, trim out the rudder, get the autopilot on. All of that stuff is basic things which pilots will know. We can brief it occasionally every so often just to maybe refresh your own memory and things, but that's not the stuff that needs to be spoken every single time you do a briefing. The main thing to touch upon is just what the engine out procedure actually is. As we can see here down from SimSmart, the engine out procedure here is a standard engine out procedure, which basically means that once we get to 1,800 feet or above, we can push the VS to level off. We're then going to make a left turn and hold at the Dane holding point. Now, it's also worthwhile just saying what altitude we're going to hold at. In this case, 4,000 feet is nice and safe at Dane, and of course air traffic control will also be able to assist as they would do in the real world. So now let's move to somewhere with a little bit more to discuss. This time we are in Geneva. Now, we've still got decent weather for this departure, but of course Geneva presents itself with some other threats to have a look at. Let's see what a brief could potentially look like then here. Okay, so let's look at this briefing on a flight from Geneva to Manchester. So as we did previously, the aircraft is all set up, the box is all set up. We've been through our operational flight plan, we've checked all the NOTAMs and things like that. There aren't any today actually, so that's quite nice. And the next thing then is to just communicate to the person sat next to you and you guys, as we do on our live streams, basically what the plan is going to be for the departure, and to look at any potential threats and things, and once we identify any threats, how we're going to mitigate those and be prepared for them. So we're parked at stand 127, which is one of the satellite stands here in Geneva. First thing to note then, our takeoff weight is below our maximum landing weight, so that's of no consequence should we need to return. One of the things with this, we don't need a pushback either. We're going to taxi straight off this stand, so we'll start engines on the stand. The runway for departure today is runway 04, so we've got figures loaded in for an in-section departure departure Foxtrot, but air traffic control most likely will give us a full length departure, but we are prepared just in case we do get that shorter taxi. Either way, it's not a long taxi regardless, so we're going to get both engines started on stand. We'll not do a single engine taxi today. We expect then just to taxi straight forward, and then it's just left onto the outer, and then we'll be holding at Golf for full length departure. So the little threat there is that it is a relatively short taxi, so once we've got the engine started, we might do the flight control checks here on stand rather than having to do them whilst we're taxiing down. So then that's done and out of the way. Let's have a look at the actual departure itself. So we're on the Cirrod 7 November departure today, which is pretty straightforward. It is straight out. It's a noise abatement 1 departure, and it's a left turn after passing 7,000, but not before 8 miles from Geneva VOR, and that then has us turning left and going up to Cirrod, so left turn and to the north. With the initial flight clearance then is flight level 90. There's no speed restrictions, and we can just leave the aircraft in managed mode, and we'll just clean up as we go. And yeah, it's from that point of flying the departure, it's pretty straightforward. So what about the potential threats then for this? Well, we've already identified the slightly short taxi and sort of said we're going to do the flight control checks on the stand, so that tries to reduce our workload management there and mitigate that. The obvious threat then here in Geneva is of course the terrain. You can see we've got terrain to the north and also to the south and the east. We've got the Alps. In fact, the highest point, Mont Blanc, is just behind us as we're sat here on stand. Now it is higher terrain to the south, as you can see. That 10,600 is the MSA, and MSA as we are flying is just 7,000. I say just, it's still quite a high MSA. So potential threats there, of course. One thing that I've done to help sort of mitigate this and build up situational awareness, we are quite lucky today because obviously we're flying in the daytime. It's also really nice weather, so we are under VMC, which means, yeah, visual meteorological conditions. Essentially, we could see what we are about to fly into. So that's a really good way to mitigate that. But if we were flying maybe at night, or if the weather was rather rubbish, low cloud, we couldn't see all of the terrain, then other things that we can do to help mitigate that, obviously one of the easiest things to do is turn on the terrain radar, have that turned on, and then obviously we can use that as well. As we just saw as well, the MSA is 7,000 feet, and that extends up to 10 miles around the Geneva VOR. So when departing from Geneva, I like to use the fixes page in the box, and with that what we can do is we can actually pop in a 10-mile radius ring around the Geneva VOR, as you can see. So I've just got that on my navigation display, which basically means that if we are inside this circle, the MSA is 7,000 feet. Another little thing to note then from the departure is we're actually climbing today up to a flight level. The initial climb clearance is flight level 90. So we will need to set standard pressure during the climb out, and we actually make the left-hand turn when passing 7,000 feet. So when we've passed 7,000 feet, we're going to push for standard pressure, and then that will have us climbing safely up to flight level 90. There could be a chance as well that ATC might want to give us a slightly earlier turn, perhaps to one of the waypoints en route. If we are going to get a slightly earlier left-hand turn, obviously let's just be sensible as to whether we're going to accept that or not. Again, because the weather's good today, we can see if we're going to be clear of that terrain, but if it was nighttime conditions and we're not happy, then perhaps we could say we're not going to accept any sort of turn off route until we're past 7,000 feet and we're above the MSA. The engine out procedure for this runway then is pretty straightforward. In fact, the engine out procedure for runway 04 is just bring up SimSmart there. Yeah, it is climb straight out on the SBR Radial 224, which is essentially just has us flying straight out on runway 24, and then we're going to hold at the Saint-Prix VOR. Now, again, we've got all of that stuff set up into our secondary flight plan in the box, so that's there just to help reduce our workload management. Okay, so two fairly straightforward, simple briefs. But what happens if things are not quite as straightforward? Perhaps an airport that we're not familiar with, or some weather that is causing issues that aren't always a natural everyday event. Let's have a look at a different kind of brief. Okay, so let's finish the video off then with something a little bit more in depth. So far we've seen some departures in areas that I'm personally familiar with, and also a place with really nice weather. So for this departure, we're in France, Charles de Gaulle in Paris, and this isn't an airport that I know particularly well. It's not one that we do on stream very often, so perhaps we probably should start. We've also got really bad weather. Here we are with LVPs in place, low visibility procedures, in an airport I am unfamiliar with, a complex set of taxiways, so this brief needs to be a little bit more thorough. As per usual, we've done the operational flight plan and aircraft setup. We've been through all of this, so that's all done. We're basically just waiting now to finish the ground crew loading up, and then we'll do our brief, after which we'll contact air traffic control. So, are we ready for the brief? Yeah. Okay then, let's get straight on it. So we're parked at stand Delta 18. Our departure runway is all the way over here. It's runway 09 right today. So having not been here for a long time, certainly not an area I'm familiar with, let's just have a look at where we can expect to go with our taxiways. So if we just have a quick look at the chart, we are following the arrows for departures to the east configuration. Now that can be found down here, departure east configuration, so we're looking for the thick arrows to see where we can expect to go. This then is going to be pushing back on stand, and we'll be facing to the west on Golf 3. So we will then presumably taxi out, and then it's going to be a right-hand turn onto Foxtrot, and then another little right to keep onto Foxtrot as well. That then takes us, and we need to be very careful here as we then want to make, I presume it's going to be they're going to send us this way, a left turn here to Quebec Bravo 1. And then that brings us here on to Delta, again following these thick double broken arrows that you can see. We've run our departure calculations from Delta 6. There is a little hot spot there as well, so we don't end up on Yankee 2 by mistake. But we'll be able to take any of those. We planned departure 6, but we can do Delta 6, sorry, but we could do Delta 5, Delta 4, Delta 3, etc. So that is the taxi route we are expecting. We'll take it nice and slow today, not just because of the weather, but as I say, also because of the unfamiliarity. With the weather as it is, then a couple of things then I want to discuss. We're in LVP conditions, which basically means that the taxiways are quite wet as well. We can see it's raining outside, so we're not going to be taxiing fast anyway. Single engine taxi is out for us today, so we'll get both engines started as we push back, which is good because given the LVP conditions, it means that the checklist needs to be run when we're stationary. So if we need to do a checklist, we'll slow the aircraft right down almost to a stop, and then we can run through the checklist. And we've got both engines started, which helps us along with that. The takeoff today as well is also going to be a toga takeoff due to that contamination. So that's the plan for the departure. Now, Charles de Gaulle normally operate with high-intensity runway operations. It's a very busy airport. That might not be the case today given the weather, but just for normal reference, we need to be ready when we get to the holding point. So all our checklists complete, so when they tell us line up and take off, we have no delay. So let's be mindful of that as we're approaching that holding point, so we're ready to go when ATC want us to move. Okay, so the departure itself, as we said, is already going to be a toga takeoff. It's straight out. It's noise abatement departure procedure 1 here. First turn shall be to the left, and there's normally a speed restriction here as well of 280 knots above 10,000 feet until cleared by air traffic control. But you can see for this departure that we're doing today, we can disregard that, and we've got free speed once passing flight level 100. There's no other speed restrictions in place or any sort of altitude constraints, so we can just leave everything in managed mode, accelerate away, clean up on schedule. Nothing out of the ordinary there with the initial departure. Our initial climb clearance for this is flight level 100. The transition altitude is 5,000, so just worth noting, once we pass that, remember we need to pull for standard pressure. MSA throughout the departure is 3,200 feet. Okay, so that's the plan. Let's now look at any threats and error management. So we know that we've spoken about the threats such as the low visibilities in place, contamination, hence the toga, slow taxis, all of that stuff. The weather is probably the biggest threat. However, there are a couple of other things on our flight today which are worth noting. So the aircraft itself actually has a thrust reverser in op. Engine number 1's thrust reverser isn't working. So once we have started the engines and the FedEx have got power, we do need to check that the ECAM comes up with the warning telling us that that is in op. We're happy about that when we see it, so we can disregard it because we know that's already in place. That then will affect, I think, our decision to stop should we end up with a failure on the takeoff roll. Obviously, it's a very wet day. Runway condition code here is 4, so the braking action is affected. The reverse thrust is a huge help on a wet day like this. So I think with the departure today, unless we have a failure below 100 knots, which is a key failure, then I think on a day like this it's probably safer to go, unless of course it's an engine failure or something like that below 100 knots. After V1, of course, we're committed to take off anyway, but let's just be mindful that if we get a very minor failure at high speed, then we are going to continue to take off rather than risk not being able to stop and potentially losing control as well on the runway. Other things to be aware of as well, and a little threat: we're actually late for our departure today because we got held up in the low visibility procedures arriving here stacked in the holds, so we're already running behind schedule. Let's make sure that we don't have a case of get there-itis. Still, don't be in a rush to do everything. Take everything nice and slow, and stick to the plan and brief that we've just prepared. At this point then, you'd obviously ask the person sat next to you if you've got any questions or any other threats and things that they may have thought of that you might have not, and the discussion would then obviously take place between the two. You'd then of course look at the engine out procedure and cover that as we'd done with the previous 2 briefs, so I'm not going to show you that because that is pretty simple and straightforward in terms of how that is briefed. Basically, make sure we know what we're doing and how we're going to do it. So there you go, 3 different briefs which I hope you found useful. The main thing to remember is keep them as simple as possible and only brief the things that actually need to be briefed. Anything that is normal, everyday, run-of-the-mill, that doesn't need to be spoken about because that is a given. It's the things that are out of the ordinary, the things that are a threat, things that you don't find on every departure, that are the key issues to make sure that both pilots are aware of them, have thought of them, and of course have mitigated them. Now, if you do have any questions on the items shown in this video, then please do leave a comment down below. And of course, if you found this useful, then please do leave a like. And remember, if you are new to the channel, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications bell so you don't miss any of our future videos or our live stream flights. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you all again in the next one. Bye bye for now.